Hello, welcome to our RecapPlus channel. Today we will watch a recap movie is called The Chronicles of Narnia, Prince Caspian, released in 2008. This is a spoiler content video. So please turn on the subtitle and let's start the story. On a cloudless night in Narnia, under an eclipse of its moon, inside a dark and forbidding castle, the Lady Protectress Prunaprismia gives birth to a son. Down the hallway, General Glazelle brings this happy news to Prunaprismia's husband, Lord Protector Miraz. Miraz then tells Glazelle to follow earlier orders, to kill young Prince Caspian, the rightful king of Narnia, 10th in line from Caspian I, the Conqueror, who first led his Telmarine forces to invade and conquer Narnia, hundreds of years before. But Caspian's loyal and devoted professor, Dr. Cornelius, will not allow that to happen. He rouses Caspian from his sleep and hustles him into his armoire, the back of which opens to a secret corridor, an obvious reference to an armoire in a different world that opened into a radically different secret passageway. Just as Caspian closes the armoire door behind him, Glazelle enters, with several men armed with crossbows, who then discharge their crossbows into Caspian's empty bed, and succeed only in filling the air with goose feathers. After which, Cornelius hurriedly assists Caspian to dress for a long ride, with his sword buckled on. The last thing that Cornelius gives Caspian is an ornate ivory horn, with the advice to blow it only in an hour of dire need and that everything you know is about to change. Caspian then falls off his horse after colliding with an overhanging tree limb and is set upon by two creatures, the nature of which he does not immediately recognize, dwarves. As the black-haired dwarf approaches, Caspian grabs the horn and blows a long, loud note before the dwarf knocks him senselessly. But the peal of that horn carries across the dimensions to 1942 London, where Susan Pevensie is trying to avoid a schoolboy who is trying to strike up a conversation when her sister Lucy summons her to the Strand Underground station. Inside, on the platform, Peter has gotten into yet another pointless fight, and soon his brother Edmund leaps into the fray to come to Peter's aid before two home guardsmen arrive, whistles blasting, roaring at everyone to break it up. And act your age. As the four sit down together on a platform bench, Peter complains bitterly about being treated like a kid who had been a high king as recently as a year before. Edmund reminds him that they are kids, and Susan has just told him that they ought to reconcile themselves to a life in England when Lucy cries out, complaining that something has pinched her, and Peter and Edmund suspect each other pinching one another. Suddenly Susan realizes that magic is at work. They all hold hands, and as an underground train passes, the very walls of the underground tube flake away and then dissolve, leaving the four standing, not in a tube train station, but in a shallow cavern near a sandy beach under a sunlit sky. The children shuck off the outer coats of their school uniforms and play in the shallow water, and then Edmund wonders where they are. Peter is confident that they are back in Narnia, but Edmund does not recall that Narnia had ruined it. He is looking up at the obvious ruins of a castle built high on a promontory overlooking the beach. The children climb the promontory and investigate the ruins, and finally, they all realize that these are the ruins of Cair Paravel, where once they had reigned jointly after fighting a major battle. Back at the Telmarine castle, Glazelle and his troops return from a sortie with a body draped over a horse. Miraz is eager to confirm the death of Caspian, but Glazelle stops him and shows him that he has brought back, not the body of Caspian, but a creature of an entirely different order, the red-headed dwarf who had challenged Glazelle, on foot and armed only with a sword, in the Shuddering Woods. An acrimonious council session begins with Lord Caspian insisting that Miraz is not a man to be trusted. Miraz walks in, apologizing for being late, and then takes some pointed accusations from Lord Sidley, Donnan, and Caspian to the effect that Caspian is missing, on the very night that Miraz's son was born. Miraz answers with an easy scapegoat. Caspian, he says, has been abducted by Narnians. They don't have long to search. A small wooden rowboat, rowed by two Telmarine soldiers, comes down to the mouth of the great river. Inside is the red dwarf, whom they are about to throw into the water when suddenly an arrow buries itself in their boat. An angry young woman, Susan, yells, "Drop him!" The soldiers throw the dwarf into the water, and as Peter and Edmund rush into the water to draw him out, Susan shoots one of the soldiers, causing the other to abandon their boat. The dwarf at first isn't very grateful to them until he realizes that he is in fact addressing the kings and queens of old. By way of demonstration, Peter allows the dwarf, named Trumpkin, to fight a short bout with Edmund. Edmund takes a little while to get his skills back but handily disarms Trumpkin. Deep in the Shuddering Woods, Caspian wakes up and overhears the black-haired dwarf, named Knickerbrick, and a talking badger named Trufflehunter discussing his fate. Caspian tries to fight Knickerbrick, but Trufflehunter silences both of them and calmly asks Caspian to identify himself, which Caspian does. His story that he is running away from his uncle, who is probably nothing less than a usurper, impresses Trufflehunter but does not impress Knickerbrick nearly as much. Caspian prepares to leave, but Truffle Hunter stops him and informs him of the true nature of the ivory horn he was carrying. At the castle, Miraz angrily confronts Cornelius with the bright red arrow recovered from the body of one of his soldiers and asks about Queen Susan's horn. Cornelius knows that his life is forfeit, but also that Caspian has done exactly as Cornelius expected. Aloud, he reveals that the Narnians believe that it could summon the 4 kings and queens. Miraz, clearly not satisfied, orders Cornelius arrested, and Lord Caspian, noticing, strikes up a frankly mutinous conversation with Glazelle. But Miraz doesn't give Caspian long enough to dwell on such matters. He orders Glazelle to go to Baruna, taking several troops with him, to reinforce Caspian's forces who have been building a bridge spanning the Great River at that point. "We must find Caspian before they do," says Miraz, who then tells Caspian that he needs a classified history lesson. Trumpkin and the 4 children row upriver, as Trumpkin tells them that the trees never talk anymore, that Aslan apparently abandoned them with the 4 children seemingly did, and that many of the talking beasts of Narnia don't know how to talk anymore. In the shuddering woods, Caspian, Knickerbrick, and Truffle Hunter set out to find other Narnians. Truffle Hunter would much prefer that Caspian wait for the old kings and queens, but Caspian is in a hurry. Then Truffle Hunter smells out a Telmarine search party, and the 3 must run for their lives. But before the Telmarines can kill them, they are killed themselves by a creature too small to see that obviously strikes from below, with deadly efficiency. Then this creature leaps out of the ferns that cover the ground in the forest, bowls Caspian over, draws a tiny sword, and shouts, "Choose your last words carefully, Telmarine." This creature is Reepicheep, who is actually a mouse. Reepicheep is inclined to kill Caspian out of hand, but Truffle Hunter tells him to put away his weapon because Caspian is the one who blew the horn, a revelation that gives Reepicheep pause. That is when a party of centaurs arrives, saying that the horn is why they have gathered. At another part of the forest, Peter insists on leading the party along a pathway that Trumpkin insists is a dead end. In fact, he is looking for a crossing that no longer exists because the river Rush has eroded for itself a canyon where a crossing once existed. Suddenly Lucy looks across the gorge, and spots Aslan, the leonine god king of Narnia. But no one will believe her, because no one but she can see Aslan. With one exception, Edmund is inclined to accept anything that Lucy says, because the last time I didn't believe Lucy, I ended up looking pretty stupid. That night, Caspian confronts a gathering of angry Narnians who debate whether to accept Caspian as a friend or kill him out of hand. Reepicheep scathingly asks Knickerbrick whether he remembers that his people once fought under the command of the ancient White Witch. Knickerbrick says that he would do so again in preference to accepting the Telmarine rule, or even an alliance. Truffle Hunter scathingly tells Knickerbrick that the other Narnians should be grateful that neither he nor anyone else can bring the White Witch back, and then asks whether he would have Caspian turn against Aslan. That sets off another round of angry catcalling. That night, Susan awakens Lucy to ask her why she, Susan, couldn't see Aslan when Lucy can. Lucy doesn't know why only she can see Aslan. Susan reveals that she had finally gotten used to the idea of living in England, and the transition is actually difficult mainly because their experience in Narnia will not last. The 2 girls fall asleep, but then Lucy, perhaps in a dream, sees a live dryad, which they have not seen in those woods since their return, and then sees Aslan, now standing much taller than he did before. Aslan tells her only, things never happen in the same way twice. At that moment, someone stepping on a twig awakens Lucy, who finds herself back in camp with her brothers and sister. Then she sets out on her own, and thinks she sees Aslan again, but Peter silences her and shows her that she is seeing an armed minotaur. Peter gets closer to investigate, and another young man attacks him with a sword. Before they can harm one another, Lucy cries out to them to stop because she realizes that this man is a friend, and is accompanied by a large group of unmistakable Narnians. Surprisingly, they see centaurs, fawns, satyrs, minotaurs, badgers, and wolves all on the same side, whereas 1,300 years ago they had been enemies and a new kind of Narnian, talking mice. Lucy might or might not remember that a group of mice freed Aslan from his bonds at the stone table after he had submitted to a ritual sacrifice. In fact, Aslan granted to mice the power of speech as a reward. Then Peter realizes whom he's talking to: Caspian, the Telmarine prince in exile. Now Caspian, Peter, the other 3 Pevensies, Truffle Hunter, Glenstorm, and Reepicheep, have a round of mutual introductions and the beginnings of a war council. The united party, with many Narnians in tow, then sets out for their stronghold, Aslan's How, built atop the ancient stone table site. Their Glenstorm Centaurian tribe greets Caspian and the 4 Pevensie children by erecting an arch of swords. At the bridge site, Miraz interrogates Glazelle after an unknown raiding party have stolen enough weapons and armor for 2 regiments, and left this message: "You were right to fear the woods. X. The X is for Caspian X. Miraz then effectively demands that Glazell pick a number of his men to have executed for sleeping on watch, or whatever charge would explain the losses in materiel. Glazell says that he will prefer 3 for that punishment. Miraz then announces that Caspian has turned renegade or, as we might say, gone native and Narnia needs a new king. Caspian, Peter, and their party reach Aslan's How and take up residence there, passing under an arch of swords upheld by Glenstorm and his many sons and cousins. Susan and Lucy are most fascinated by another find deep in the How, the original stone table, still in the cracked-in-two condition in which they left it when Aslan was originally resurrected from the dead. There they see fresco portraits of the 4 of them, and of Aslan, but Peter, unimpressed, declares, "I think it's up to us now." Peter knows that they have already been discovered because a Fawn sentry has already reported seeing a Telmarine cavalry scout appear briefly at the edge of the woods and then ride off. Peter then outlines his plan, to attack the Telmarine castle, while the troops normally guarding it are out looking for them or preparing to move against Aslan's How. Caspian protests, saying that no one has ever successfully captured the castle and that they ought to hold out where they are. Peter will have none of it. "This isn't a fortress, it's a tomb," he says, and could as easily say that one does not withstand siege without hope of a relief army and that the best defense is the offense. Lucy is the only voice of reason. They ought to seek Aslan, rather than believing that the only alternatives are dying here, or dying there. Sadly, the massive raid on the castle ends badly. Caspian can rescue Dr. Cornelius, his old professor, but then wastes crucial time confronting Miraz and his wife over the death of his father. Miraz frankly admits his role in killing King Caspian IX, a revelation that embarrasses him in front of Prunaprismia but that does not mitigate Caspian's failure to open the castle gate at a crucial time. Result, half of the invading force ends up killed, trapped and helpless, and dying under a hail of crossbow bolts, while the other half can only watch helplessly before they must get away themselves. Glenstorm, in particular, sees at least half his sons killed in the action and must break this terrible news to his wife when Peter and Caspian's battered forces return to the How. Lucy alone does not participate in the invasion and is available to administer her powerful medicinal cordial to the wounded, including Trumpkin, whose wound would have been fatal without it. But Peter and Caspian get into a bitter argument about failed plans, and whether Telmarines have any rightful place in Narnia at all. Edmund is the only person who can stop Peter and Caspian from killing each other in a duel at the very gate of Aslan's How. As Miraz now has himself crowned king and accepts multiple troop pledges from the various feudal lords of Baruna, Toshban, Edinsmore, and the island of Galma, Nickabrick suggests to Caspian that he put his trust in another, more ancient power that once kept Aslan himself at bay. He introduces Caspian to a werewolf and a hag, who inform him that they have between them reserves of endurance and hate that none can match, and can guarantee Miraz's death, and more. The hag then proceeds to draw a circle with her overgrown fingernail, and then draw out what looks like the broken off half of a crystal scepter, while chanting a harsh sounding mantra. She then raises her voice and plants the scepter on one edge of the circle, whereupon an icy block forms in midair, and inside the block appears none other than Jadis, the ancient and long-dead White Witch, and original owner of the scepter, which once had the power to petrify any objector creature it touched before Edmund cleaved it in battle with the witch. "One drop of Adam's blood, and you free me, and then I am yours, my king," says Jadis, with all the seductiveness she can muster. Nickabrick and the werewolf then lay hold of Caspian, and the hag slashes his left palm to force him to contribute the blood. Suddenly Peter, Lucy, Edmund, and Trumpkin arrive and fight with Nickabrick, the werewolf, and the hag. Nickabrick almost kills Lucy before Trumpkin kills him. Edmund acquits himself best of all, by drawing the werewolf away and killing it with a single slash. Peter shoves Caspian aside and confronts Jadis, and that is a mistake because Peter is now inside the circle. Jadis turns her charm on Peter, saying, "You know you can't do this alone." Before Peter can succumb to her charms himself, the icy monolith cracks, then shatters. Then Peter beholds Edmund, who has stabbed the block with his sword. Edmund waits a few seconds for Peter to thank him, a thing that Peter has never made a habit of doing, and finally says, "I know, you had it sorted." This is, of course, the second time that Edmund has rescued Peter from almost certain death at the witch's hands. At last, Peter realizes how mistaken he has been, and finally accepts Lucy's insistence that she can recognize Aslan and find him again. He complains that Aslan ought to have offered him proof, and Lucy suggests that perhaps Aslan was waiting for the Pevensies to prove themselves to him. Caspian, for his part, has a heart-to-heart talk with Cornelius, who tells him that he always looked for Caspian to be that noblest contradiction, the Telmarine who saved Narnia. Miraz's troops cross the now completed bridge over the great river and arrive at the How, hundreds of them, with 4 trebuchets in tow. Now Peter announces his next plan, to send Susan and Lucy to ride deep into the shuddering wood to seek Aslan because only Aslan can help them now. Caspian then advises Peter that Miraz has one more weakness. As king, he must satisfy the traditions and expectations of his people. One of them deciding a battle by single combat might buy them some time. Accordingly, Edmund, dressed in his original royal armor, walks boldly to Miraz's camp and delivers a written challenge from Peter to Miraz to engage him in single combat. Miraz's lords, using a little too much charm, suggest that Miraz is within his rights to refuse. Miraz is inclined to do anything but because he will not back down in front of these men. This, of course, is exactly what Lord Caspian wants, a fact that Miraz, on the occasion of the duel, clearly recognizes. Susan and Lucy depart, astride Caspian's faithful war charger. Caspian offers to give Susan back her ivory horn, but Susan declines, saying, "You might need to call me again," a declaration that causes Lucy to ask her sarcastically what she means by that. Susan has neither time nor inclination to explain such a thing as romance to a little sister still too young to understand it. As Peter and Miraz engage one another among some ruins outside the house, Susan and Lucy ride partway into the woods, and then Susan sends Lucy on alone and turns to meet a Telmarine patrol with her bow and arrows. Susan kills 3 Telmarines and risks dying anyway when Caspian shows up at the last minute, rescues her, and brings her back to the house. Peter and Miraz manage to bloody one another, and then Peter asks for 5 minutes respite, of which Miraz grants 3. Peter and Edmund have a chance to make up for a lost time, and Susan assures them that Lucy got through, with a little help from Caspian. Miraz, for his part, is irritated with Caspian for not intervening earlier in the fight, a highly illegal thing that Miraz had asked Caspian to do, but which Caspian is disinclined to do, though not for any honorable reason. The two leaders clash once again, and Peter finally defeats Miraz. Instead of killing him outright, Peter hands his sword over to Caspian, saying that Miraz's life is not his to take. Caspian is willing to spare Miraz but will hand over the sovereignty back to the Narnians. But Caspian kills Miraz, using one of Susan's red arrows, which he probably stole from Dr. Cornelius' library after Miraz had rammed it into a drawing of the ancient kings and queens, and cries treachery. This causes the Telmarines to launch a full-scale assault on the house. Glazelle orders a cavalry charge while the artillerymen start a continuous barrage with their mechanized trebuchets. The Narnian forces manage to delay the Telmarines by undermining the ground under their horses' hooves and then having a contingent of archers, under Susan's command, shoot a hail of arrows at the enemy cavalry after they fall into the sinkhole they have created, while Caspian and Glenstorm lead a cavalry charge into the Telmarines' rear. Then Caspian sends in his infantry, and the defeat of the Narnians seems inevitable, especially after the artillerymen send their boulders crashing into the gate of the house, sealing it. But Lucy can get into the woods close enough for Aslan to meet Lucy and pounce on another pursuing Telmarine patrol. "And now I think your friends have slept long enough. Don't you?" Aslan asks, and with a roar, he awakens the trees of Narnia from their 1300-year slumber. And so, at the last instant, Caspian has fallen into the sinkhole, where Glazelle, halberd in hand, is about to impale him and hesitates. Before he can decide which side he really wants to be on, an animated tree root thrusts itself out of the ground behind him, picks him up, and pulls him into an overhang, knocking him senseless. As Peter helps Caspian back onto ground level, the trees, fully animated, walk onto the field by their roots and turn the tide of battle. One rock cast by a trebuchet knocks down one tree, which collapses and dies, but then another tree extends a long root to topple the trebuchet and crush it. With that, Peter, Caspian, Susan, and Edmund lead a countercharge, and the Telmarines fall back. Caspian withdraws his troops to the bridge, thinking that might prove a more defensible position. Peter, Caspian, Edmund, and Susan pursue them, of course. Then, at the bridge, Caspian is surprised to find himself confronted, first by a little girl, Lucy, armed with nothing more than a small dagger, and then by a tall lion, which ambles up to the bridge as though he owns the world. Caspian orders a charge, and then Aslan, taking the measure of his enemy for about 5 seconds, lets out another roar. This time he awakens the godlike personification of the river, which nearly drowns Caspian's troops and does drown Caspian himself, after lifting the bridge off its moorings, with Caspian and his horse still standing on it. After that, the Telmarine troops surrender their weapons to the Narnians. Aslan and Lucy receive Peter, Susan, Edmund, and Caspian. "Rise, kings and queens of Narnia, all of you," says Aslan, making clear to a suddenly diffident Caspian that he will well and truly be the next king of Narnia, under Aslan's direct authority. Then the little band of mice brings Reepicheep forward on a litter. Lucy revives Reepicheep with her medicinal cordial, and Reepicheep bows before Aslan before noticing that he has lost his tail. Aslan teases him about being overly concerned about his honor but restores the tail anyway, after the other mice show their willingness to cut off theirs to spare their chief any humiliation. Finally, Aslan asks Trumpkin to step forward and roars at him as if to demonstrate that Aslan does in fact exist and is definitely someone to reckon with. Aslan leads Caspian and the 4 Pevensie children through the Telmarine's capital city, whose inhabitants greet them all with cheers and garlands, and then into the castle, which from now on will have a far less gloomy aspect. Subsequently, Caspian calls an assembly of all the Telmarines, and announces that from now on, Narnia will be a Narnian Telmarine Federation and that any Telmarines not willing to accept that may return to the land of our forefathers. But this is not the land of Telmar to the west of Narnia. Instead, it is an island on our familiar earth, where the Telmarines' ancestors, who were a crew of pirates, were shipwrecked on an island holding a portal to the Narnian world. Glazelle, who has recovered from being dazed at the battle, offers to go first, followed by the Dowager Queen Prunaprismia and her newborn son. When they appear to disappear through the portal that Aslan creates, the other Telmarines express skepticism, and Reepicheep offers to lead 11 mice through the portal to serve as an example. That is when Peter announces that he and his siblings will go through the portal because Caspian must now take charge. Furthermore, Peter and Susan will not return to Narnia again, though Edmund and Lucy will. Susan says goodbye to Caspian, saying that a romance between them would never have worked, because I am about 1300 years older than you are. And so the 4 step through the portal and find themselves back on the railway platform of the Strand Underground Station, where they board the next train. To watch more video like this, click on the videos on your screen, and don't forget to let me know how you feel about today's video in the comments down below. And at last I will say stay safe and stay healthy. See you next videos.